Good morning, everybody. I got my coffee. I got my vape. Let's talk a little. Today, I want to talk about a subject that I ran from. I avoided this thing for almost my whole entire life, vigorously. It's called the art of submission. Once I finally mastered this, I realized that you can't grow or accomplish anything without doing this. The more you fight it, the longer you keep floundering around and going in circles and being limited in your success. And once I actually started using this and being successful with it, I started looking back on my life and realized that even though I was fighting it and running from it, I was actually using it. And the times that I was using it, those were the times that I had success. So before we get started with that, let's take a big old sip. We're talking about submission. Now, submission is a bad word. In most people's vocabulary, it is. But hopefully, if you bear with me, by the end of this talk, you'll have a different outlook on it, like I did. So let's start with the definition. I'm getting really good at these definitions. All right, here it is. Submission. The definition is the action of Let me start over. The action or fact of accepting or yielding to a superior force or to the will or authority of another person. Man, that's a mouthful. The action of presenting a proposal, application, or other document for consideration or judgment. Okay, the thing that jumped out with that was accepting or yielding, something that we are in control of. Well, my perception of submission most of my life was giving up. It was giving control of myself to somebody else. And once given, there's a good chance I'd never get it back again. It meant losing my individuality and being completely encompassed by somebody else, losing my ability to make a mark on the world. And I kind of associated this with abuse of power, that somebody was able to abuse power over me. I wanted to make my mark on the world. That was the biggest thing that drove me from not wanting to submit to anybody. I think we all have this inherent desire to not be forgotten, to make a mark when we're gone from this world, that we're going to be remembered. And that seems to be not necessarily stronger when we're younger, but I think since we don't have this concept of longevity, it's more urgent. I thought the way of doing this was by not conforming. Absolutely not conform. I want to be my own person. When people remembered Phil throughout history, they remembered me as my own man. I was creating something from scratch. I didn't want to share credit for it. It needed to be my idea. I needed to be able to do it from the beginning. I needed to finish it with nobody's help. And when I did look for somebody's help or somebody was offering me help, I was more interested in bragging and being proud of what I thought rather than listening to what they were teaching. I ran from anybody who told me what to do. Authority figures, teachers, coaches, anybody that had any kind of strong personality, any kind of leader or boss figure, I just didn't have anything to do with them. I felt very uncomfortable around them. I couldn't handle criticism. I got very angry if you tried to criticize me or I perceived you criticizing me. Definitely wasn't going to conform in any way, shape, or form. I was proud of the fact that I had long hair and I was doing what I wanted to do. And mentorship? Forget it. There's absolutely no way. What did that do for me? It limited my success. I had no momentum in anything because I was trying to do it myself and I'd get frustrated. And I was changing my direction constantly. This isn't working, so I'm going to go in this direction. Well, I'm going to go in this direction. I was going to go in this direction, and I'm going to go in this direction because I had to figure everything out for myself. And I gave up pretty quick. So at some point, I realized that I had to change my perception. And these are the steps that led up to. These aren't the steps that I used to change my perception. This is what led me up to that aha moment where I realized it and I started thinking differently. First thing is I started reading. I hated reading when I was in school. I read 2 books my whole entire life. One of them was, believe it or not, it was the Odyssey. But I really loved mythology, so I ate that one up. I read Lord of the Flies because it was assigned to me in school and they didn't have those little cartoon cliff notes for it down in the library, because that's what I would use. I don't know why they had those. There were little booklets that were basically comics that told you the story in about 5 to 10 pages, and that's how I would do my book reports. I actually enjoyed that book. But at one point, I actually started reading. I started off reading spiritual books. That led me to self-help books. That led me to positive mental attitude books and development books. And I started reading. Now from that, I started observing others. I was actually really attracted to people who seemed like they could never fail. Seems like they could pick up anything and within minutes they were good at it. They weren't bad at anything. I thought that was something that they had to be born with, but it fascinated me. I learned that can be developed too. From observing people and seeing the things that they were doing, it led me to asking questions and asking for help and actually taking advice. Of course, at that point, I was still more interested once I got to talking to them and showing them what I knew. If they started telling me stuff that I thought I already knew, my brain shut off and that was it. But from that point, I kind of started learning how to be a student, how to be a mentoree. I realized that I had to master my ego. If I was going to get help from somebody, then I was going to have to sit there and listen. And you know what? They don't know what I know. So it's a lot faster if they just talk from the very beginning and I wait to start building stuff that I don't know and adding to what I already know. And then I started practicing intentional submission. When I would recognize that I needed something from somebody, then I started being conscious of being submissive, of learning those techniques. And as I said before, once I started getting good at that, I started noticing that I had been doing this my whole entire life in certain times. There were certain triggers that I avoided, but Bob Dylan probably said it best. You got to serve somebody. It may be the devil or it may be the Lord, but you're going to have to serve somebody. And that's the same thing with submission. You're going to have to be submissive to one thing or the other. If you're not submissive to things that will help you, then you're going to be submissive to your ego and your fears. And that's a miserable way to live. Submission isn't necessarily just to another person. You can be submissive to just about anything. When you're learning, you're submitting to a teacher, and you're definitely submitting to that information. You're giving up your ego to listen to what is being said and follow along in the direction that they're taking you, or you're not going to learn that, not efficiently anyway. When you meditate, you are definitely submitting to relaxing, to the release of thoughts and reactions. That actually is a really great way to master submission. You submit to rules and laws and trusting somebody and faith. Those take submission. In fact, I kind of think that lack of submission is probably one of the things that gets in the way of people believing and following a higher source. Definitely God. It definitely gets in the way of Christians. And submission isn't always one way. In fact, that's what I figured out. When I figured out that I was using submission, it was a back and forth thing. It usually flows back and forth like the tide, in, out. Communication takes submission. If you think about it, a good conversation is one person giving an idea as precise as they can, and then stopping, and then the other person gets to speak and they get to give their views. That's the best way a conversation works. In fact, I read a series of books called The 10th Insights, I think, something like that. Anyway, One of the concepts was that you could actually feel when it was somebody's turn to talk. So if you're in a group of people, you say what you're going to say, and you can actually feel when it's time for you to shut up. And everybody else can actually feel which person is supposed to talk next. It's the person who has the next piece of the puzzle. But one way or the other, if one person dominates the conversation, it's not going to be a successful conversation. If one or the other person is afraid to express themselves and doesn't contribute to the conversation, it's not going to go anywhere. So it is kind of a submission back and forth. A successful marriage? A successful marriage takes constant large and small submissions. It takes compromise. And compromise is actually a pyramid of little submissions laying on top of each other. And being submissive is something that you control, unless you don't. If a person is being dominated, whether physically or emotionally, then that's a totally different subject. A lot of times that is hidden and requires outside intervention. And as a society, I think we need to be constantly looking for ways to help people like that. They're in kind of a prison. Make sure you don't enter into an unhealthy situation or relationship. Think about it beforehand. Think about that submission. Make sure that before you submit to somebody, that this is going to work out good for you. I make the decision. Does it serve me or does it not serve me? I tell you, when it really, really hit me was when I needed a mentor. When I first found a mentor, I didn't understand how to be a mentoree. A mentee? That sounds like a breath mint. Anyway, I had to learn that if the person was going to take their time to help me and invest in me, then I needed to do what they said to do, or else why were they wasting their time? I think I talked about this a few weeks ago when I was talking about mentorship. So I learned that I had to submit to them, but at any point that this relationship didn't work out or didn't seem like I was getting the benefit that I wanted to out of it, I could change that relationship and I could change that situation. You know what? We've gone a long time without a sip, and that coffee is looking mighty good. Okay, so hopefully at this point, you're beginning to think about submission in a different way. You're figuring out that you actually have control. You're figuring out that your mark on the world, your individuality, has nothing to do with being submissive. You can make a bigger mark on the world if you're standing on the shoulders of giants instead of recreating the wheel. And you're starting to recognize all the small little submissions that come about throughout our lives that help things to be successful. You know, you might call it compromise, but compromise takes submission. So here's some suggestions. These are the things that have helped me. I found ways to practice. I practice in conversations. I practice listening and talking at the right times. I practice giving thought to what the other person said. I gave a lot of thought to what I would say and how I would say it. Precisely communicating my ideas and thinking about how it was being understood and how it was being received. And you know what? I have found times when finding the exact right words to say to somebody, I could get them to back off pretty quick. But that's a totally different rabbit hole. I would also practice in relationships. That's a big one. I practice with Myrna all the time. There is lots of opportunities to practice in relationships. You know, I was discussing this subject with my sister, and we realized through talking about this how intricate and far-reaching the art of submission is. I could actually do a book on it. It's definitely not a few minutes over a cup of coffee. So I will probably hit on different aspects of this later. We'll see how it goes. But for now, I'm going to take me another sip. So let me know, how do you see submission? Have you discovered the art of submission for yourself? And how do you use it? What skills have you figured out to help you use it better? Leave that down in the comment. I would be really interested in finding out. I love talking about this subject because it was such a bad subject for me to talk about my whole entire life. Now, if you're new to my channel, please take a look around. Got a lot of videos for you to listen to. There's quite a few in this Coffee with Phil playlist. I hope you find something that you enjoy and adds value to you. If you do, consider subscribing. Hit the thumbs up or hit the thumbs down. Leave me some criticism. I love criticism. Consider sharing this with a friend. Hit the ringy-dingy thing so that you're notified next time I make a video. And as always, no matter what tune that life plays you, always find your groove. Thanks for hanging out with me and having some coffee and talking about this really difficult subject. I will talk to you later.